What's going on, guys? DStyleBoxing here. Thanks to those joining me live and to those who'll be joining me on archive. Check it out. Right? Here's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about the difference between boxing and mixed martial arts to boxing and Marquess of Queensberry. Right? I mean, I would call it boxing and boxing, but that would be a little too redundant. I don't want to do that. Right? I don't want to be a little too redundant and shit. So, boxing and Marquess of Queensberry, it sounds good. It sounds important and shit. Like, doesn't it? Like, it sounds more than what it really is. But anyway, so obviously, boxing techniques are borrowed from what we know as boxing, okay? And they are utilized in what we know as a sport of mixed martial arts, right? That's really what it is. It's a very small component. They take whatever is useful from boxing and implement it in mixed martial arts. That's basically what they do, right? So MMA, which is basically, hybrid fighting, okay? It's basically no holds barred fighting with rules, all right? That's what it is. And a couple of differences here. So whenever you watch mixed martial arts, okay, if you notice, number one, the obvious. It's the first obvious, without a doubt, the most obvious, observation. Okay, the word lost me for a moment there, but the most obvious observation is the stance, right? The stance is, I mean, both stances couldn't be any more different, right? There's some similarities, but for the most part, the stances are far different. In MMA, for the most part, they're fighting from whenever they're quote unquote boxing or kickboxing, okay, they're fighting from a very long range. Okay, even when they're primarily throwing fists, they're fighting from a very long range, right? Comparative to boxing. In boxing, it's very, very close quarters for the most part, unless you're like an ambush fighter or something like that. But for the most part, it's in close quarters. It's a lot closer, right? The arms can only reach so far. Kicks reach a little farther, right? Also, the boxing stance and the MMA stance, right? Just like anything, they require balance, but they also, require different, looks, right? You got to be prepared for different things. So the MMA stance is made to prepare yourself for kicks. It's made to prepare yourself for, somebody to shoot at you for a takedown. It's made for somebody if they want to shoot a fucking flying knee in your face. There's different, components here, right? Kicking being the big one, and also takedowns. So that's the first thing. What we know as outside boxing, compared to mixed martial arts, it's really fought at very close quarters in Marquess of Queensberry compared to MMA. Okay, very close quarters. So the stance is the obvious one. It's the one that really stands out. If you look at a mixed martial arts fight and you're in the middle of watching that fight, if you look at it and you think to yourself, man, if this is a boxing fight, this guy will be open for this, and he'd be open for that. He'd be open for a guy to come on the inside and throw some hooks to the body. And, you have to understand that if somebody were to do that, okay, let's say someone were to get close, all right, like a Julio Cesar Chavez or something like that. Like if they were to get really close, like a bull, all right, and start trying to land hooks to the body, like Ancho Liga, right? In mixed martial arts, there's underhooks, that they can grab you from the back of the neck. They can grab you from, you know, from the arms. They can take you down. They could go for a double leg. Okay, they grab it from the. They could go, you know, Muay Thai and grab it from the back of the neck and throw knees in your face. So it's a whole different dynamic in both sides. Okay, the same thing in mixed martial arts. If you look at a boxing fight, a boxer may look like vulnerable to kicks, and because they are, right? They're going to look vulnerable to getting kneed in the face because they are, right? They're going to look vulnerable to get kicked in the legs because of the leg position because they are. You know, it's different, okay? Because in a boxing fight, those things are illegal. You can't do those things. So why would a boxer, okay, guard himself against things that are illegal to do? Okay, so you know, so the stance is the one obvious, you know, component, you know, that really stands out. Okay, where the similarities are the techniques in which the punches are thrown, right? The stance is different, but when they throw a jab, that doesn't really change. Like an effective jab, okay, like when you throw that jab, you know, and you let that weight like fall in the middle, okay, that technique is still, for the most part, well, not as well done, underdeveloped, in my opinion, in most cases. Although I've seen some MMA guys with pretty good jabs, it's still, you know, throwing the same. You know, the setup of a hook is the same. A straight's the same. The way you throw an uppercut is the same. They're just not there's not a wide variety of it. You know, it's not as advanced as it is in boxing, right? In as far as in Marquess or Queensberry rules, it just isn't, and that's because the rules of that game don't allow it to, right? It's there's no reason, or it's actually not to their benefit to do certain techniques that work in boxing and set up certain punches the way you would in boxing because of the other things that your opponent can do to you, right? So that's the first thing. I wanted to really talk about the stance and also the setup of the punches. It's very similar, right? Now, so some other differences, though, however, okay, is certain techniques and how they're very effective in MMA, right? But they're just non-existent in boxing. Like, for example, setting up a punch with a kick, right? Leg kicks are used a lot to set up like a Superman punch, for example, right? You wouldn't really see that in boxing. Like, you know, it just wouldn't make sense, right? Because you're not setting that up with a kick. Okay, there's no anticipation from the kick or anything like that, right? So kicks are a big dynamic in, you know, like even when I was actually watching Nate Diaz versus McGregor earlier, and I noticed McGregor set up his punches with his kicks. That's how he set up his punches. You know, that was throwing Nate Diaz off. You know, that was catching him, you know, by surprise because of the way he set it up with the kicks. You know, you take that away from someone who's used to doing that, then we got some problems. You know, a couple of things. So in boxing, okay, Marquess of Queensberry rules. Inside fighting, to me, this is to me, is one of the most beautiful things. Okay, I love inside boxing. Right? You know, it's guys that fight on the inside and shoulder to shoulder and are able to. They have real good movement inside. They could set up uppercuts on the inside. That's the, especially fights where two guys are on the inside, and to me those are some of the best fights. Okay, you know, that's that type of boxing, that phone booth boxing, when guys are on the inside like that, right? It's to me is very exciting to watch, right? But that is 100%. That is non-existent, okay, in mixed martial arts. And there's a reason for it, but it doesn't exist in MMA, right? In mixed martial arts, you know, they'll say something like, you've heard the term, quote unquote, dirty boxing, right? And that's when guys come in, and it's similar to inside fighting and boxing, but not quite, okay? Number one, some very important details. In mixed martial arts, you know, they have those small gloves, and they're able to open their hands, right? With those hands, they're able to grab opponents. That's an obvious, you know, difference. Also, in MMA, guys are never mind the obvious. They're able to throw a knee at any time. They're able to go for a takedown at any time. Okay, but especially in a cage, right? They lean on each other, and you know it's like you can't lean on an opponent in boxing, like, you know, like that. Like that's not gonna happen. Okay, they'll break that up quick. All right. You know, it's just and leaning on somebody when you're not able to throw knees at them or go for, or always have that threat of going for a takedown or something like that, right? It just doesn't work in boxing. Okay, it just wouldn't work. They'll just step to the side and boom, onto your body. I mean, it's not a good look, right? The dirty boxing, you know, I see guys grab one guy from the back of the neck and, you know, get some uppercuts in there, and you know, you can't do that in boxing. Now, I'm not saying boxers have never done it. Okay, like Lennox Lewis did his thing where he would kind of hold somebody's head down just long enough to start the uppercut, then he'd let go, and then bam, you get that uppercut in there, right? It's kind of like it puts the ref in a situation where you weren't holding it the moment you hit him, I guess, right? But it's very subtle and it's very quick, you know, and you know, you're risking a point there. You know, that's not something you should be doing. In MMA, that's perfectly legal. You know, you don't have to be slick about it. You could be just blatant about what you're doing, right? But that's not quite, you know, what inside boxing is, right? At most, in the sport of boxing, they'll hold one arm. Okay, they'll hook it because of the way that the gloves are built, right? You know, like if your opponent has their glove, let's say they have their left arm under your, okay, their left hand, I'm sorry, or their glove under your right arm. Because of the way the glove is built, you can put your arm down and they're not able to pull the glove out, right? So you trap their arm right there. And if you have your left hand open, right, at that point you could punch with that free hand. That's basically at the most that you could really do in boxing. Like, you know, like you can't really, you know, it's not really legal to do anything else like from there. You know, in boxing, you'll see uppercuts to the stomach. You don't really see that in MMA. I'm not saying they never do, but it's very rare because they're throwing knees to the body. Okay, it's different. So the whole thing is, you know, in boxing, when someone's holding you, you can use your elbows, kind of like Gennady Golovkin does when someone's trying to hold him, and he extends his elbows out. Then he brings his elbows, you know, back in closer to each other, you know. And with boxing gloves, it's kind of hard to hold somebody when they keep doing that with their hands, right? Like it's not as easy as people think it is. You know, and that brief moment as you know, push your elbows out, okay, away from each other, and then back close to each other. I mean, at that very moment, if somebody's trying to grab you, you've just pushed both their hands away from each other, and now you have your elbows close to you. At that point, you know, you have some open body work in there, and as you land to the body, pa pa, the other guy will come down. At that point, they're open for an uppercut. You know, it's a different dynamic altogether inside fighting. You know, I hate when anybody says, okay, or they refer to inside boxing as dirty boxing, okay, in Marquess of Queensberry, I cringe because it's absolutely nothing like what you see in MMA, right? You know, it's almost like they're calling it dirty boxing because it's illegal in boxing to do that. You know, there is a blatant difference, okay, between the two. So let's talk about holding, all right? Now, a lot of people assume that, hey, these MMA guys, they do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. These MMA guys, they do wrestling. These MMA guys, they grapple on the ground and stuff like that. They're always against the cage and doing underhooks, and they're always tying each other up for position and all that. So obviously, if they want to, I mean, they could just go in there and just maul a boxer to death and just beat the shit out of them that way. That's an assumption that a lot of people make. Now, let me just say this very, very clearly, okay? There has been, okay, not just MMA, let's go over it. There's been Muay Thai fighters that have gone to boxing. Muay Thai fighters fight off a clinch. I never seen Muay Thai, like, there's been successful Muay Thai fighters, but I don't see them like manhandling boxers in the ring. Okay, there's been guys who did wrestling, okay, in high school and college that boxed. I don't see them manhandling people in the boxing ring. There's been people that have done mixed martial arts, like Mike Perry, current middleweight contender in the UFC, right? I didn't see him manhandle the journeyman boxer and knock his ass out. I didn't see him do that. I saw him get knocked out, but I didn't see him manhandle the dude. Even in dominating performances like Victor Belfort, he wasn't, although he dominated, he fought some nobody, right? And he dominated. And in fairness, if there was ever someone from MMA that I thought, yeah, that guy would be something in boxing, I always felt it was Victor Belfort, right? But we're not going to dive into that right now. But I think he had the frame for it. I think he was kind of built to be a boxer, to be honest with you. But that aside, he wasn't mauling his opponent. He was outboxing him. He was beating the shit out of him with punches. But when the guy held him, he just held his hands out and waited for the ref to break it up. It's a different type of holding. The holding in boxing is, number one, it's very subtle, right? It's very subtle holding. You can't do blatant holding in boxing. Now, there's a lot of boxing fans that cry and they don't like guys that hold, and they act like, and they'll actually say things like, oh, Andre Ward should go to MMA if he wants to do all that holding. And, like, it's a thing, it's a thing that boxing fans cry about, okay? Now, holding is nothing new in boxing. Holding is an art form in boxing. Now, in the grand scheme of things, it's a dying art, okay? It really is. And it seems like more, like a lot of fighters out of Europe and, no offense, but they're not really good when it comes to that, right? They're just not. And you have fans like pulling off the Marquess of Queensberry rules and, look, it says no wrestling and no hugging. But they don't really know what that means. Like, it literally means no wrestling. A clinch is not wrestling, okay? Now, you have to understand, before, like, the London prize rules and Marquess of Queensberry rules in prize fighting, dudes were, like, throwing each other and shit, okay, to the ground and all that. They made that illegal in the sport, right? And they made it official through the Marquess of Queensberry rules. Right, but look, Jack Johnson would hold. A lot of fighters would hold. Lennox Lewis held. Okay, holding is a thing. Now, the thing is not, the holding in boxing is not a violent hold, right? It's not like you're not allowed to grab a dude and then shove him to the ground, right? Like, you have to understand that you're not shoving the guy to the ground. You're not allowed to shove him over to the ropes and hold him there, to the corner, right? Unless you're Marco Barrera against Nassim Hamed. I don't even know how that dude got away with that shit. But with that aside, right? Poor Nassim, man. Poor Nassim. The holding is real subtle in boxing. You know, it's not as blatant. Like, you'll be surprised how fast the hold happens, especially compared to MMA. You know how many breaks there's in boxing compared to MMA? How often do they stop a fight in MMA and then restart it? How often does that happen? It happens if, the ref deems that nothing's happening in the ground and he stands them up, right? That maybe happens once a round at the most in a 5-minute round, right? Sometimes it doesn't even happen at all. He might stop it if the fighter's doing something illegal, like an eye poke, or he's grabbing onto the cage and they're trying to take him down. But that's about it. Like, there's not a lot of stoppage in boxing, right? You have some exceptions here and there. It depends on the styles, but in many fights, there's a lot of breaks. They're boxing, break. They're boxing, break. Break it up. Okay, box. Break it up. Okay, box. Fight out of the hole. Fight out of the hole. All right, stop. Box. Like, you know how much that happens? That's always been normal. That's not something out of the ordinary, right? So first of all, and it's not to the MMA fans, it's just to a lot of quote unquote boxing fans out there, that is perfectly normal. That's been happening since the beginning of time, okay, when it came to boxing. The whole point of that is to force guys, first of all, to fight standing up and to fight with their fists. That had to be designed that way, and a ref was instructed to be in the ring for that specific purpose, right? If you don't have a referee in a boxing fight and two guys get in a clinch, without somebody telling them to break, what do you think is going to happen? You think one guy's going to trust the other guy? You think they're going to talk to each other in the clinch and be like, okay, I think we should let go now and get back to boxing? No, you need a ref for that. I mean, you'd have a fucking street fight, right? If both guys would end up in the ground or some shit, who knows, right? It will stop being a boxing fight immediately. That's why you need a referee, okay? You could have an MMA fight. In our reality, you could have an MMA fight without a ref. Refs are only there because commissions have rules, right? And without those commissions, you don't have a sport. But they're really not necessary. Like, if a dude's in the ground and they're not doing anything, that's not really like, it's really, for whatever reason, they stand guys up if quote unquote nothing's happening, but you really don't need a ref. Like, in order to have a mixed martial arts fight, you don't need a ref. You really only need a ref to stop the fight when it's over. Really, that's really all you need a ref for. And like I said, some exceptions, grabbing onto the cage, stuff that has been deemed illegal by the commissions, right? Fish hooking, eye poking, stuff like that. Right? That's the only reason a ref is there. In boxing, yes, a ref is there to call you out for a foul. The ref is there for all that too, right? But a ref is there to tell you to, if you turn your back, that's a big no-no in boxing. He's there to tell you not to turn your back. But most importantly, a ref is there to make the boxing fight possible. Without the ref, the fight's not a full 12-round boxing fight is almost impossible to complete. You need a referee. Right? Now, anyway, back to the holding. In boxing, right, the holding, first of all, is very defensive and very quick, right? So, number one, if a boxer grabs you and he holds on to you, right, I don't care if you're a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, okay? What are you going to do? You can't take him down, right? Will you take him down and mount him? You can't do that, right? What are you going to do? Throw him? Are you going to judo throw him? You can't do that either. That's illegal, right? Everything that you can do as a mixed martial artist is illegal, right? Well, he could get positioning. At that point, the ref's going to break it up. When a guy's just holding on, the ref breaks it up. At that point, it becomes an infraction. He breaks it up, right? Now, then you say, well, what about what if the boxer's trying to gain position in there to land some punches? Well, that's his specialty. That's what he does. Same thing applies. You can't go for a takedown. You can't do any of that, right? You know, it's like like you're grappling for the opposite reason that you would in a real fight, like a street fight, or in a in an MMA fight. Okay, it's you're not holding to grab a hold of him to stop to take him down or something like that. Okay, that's not what you're holding. Well, you can't get him against the corner and then like lean against him, and do quote unquote dirty boxing. You can't do all that. That's illegal, right? You just can't do that. When the ref says break, at that point you got to listen to the ref's instruction. If you do anything after he says break, you could take away a point. You got to break, right? So it's a very subtle, quick thing, right? Holding in boxing, right? Unless both guys are fighting for positioning in there, right? Which I like. I like that type of fighting. But once one guy is just holding on, right? So there's a way to just hold on. There's a way to get away. There's just two ways to do things. So another thing that came in mind was this, right? So I remember Joe Rogan was like, well, maybe Conor should do a Bernard Hopkins on Floyd. Like box from the outside and just come in and I quote, Bernard Hopkins is him. Okay. Like Bernard didn't really do much in the clinch. Like if you really look at it, I mean, he did a lot of dirty shit, don't get me wrong. But Bernard Hopkins did a lot of dirty shit, right? Like Bernard Hopkins was notorious for giving his back to the ref and then boom, hitting the opponent low or on the thigh and shit like that. So I guess, do illegal tactics, but don't get caught, if you could pull it off, I guess, but for the most part, Bernard Hopkins was a boxer, okay, meaning he was good at mid-range. He was good at staying on the outside, very defensive, okay, defensive-minded fighter, had a real good, right hand, a good leaping hook, right? Like with Pascal, he would leap with a hook, bam, get him, and then he would just hold Pascal, so Pascal couldn't retaliate until the ref broke him up. So just bam, he would hold him, all right, break it up. Bam, he hold him, all right, break it up. So it just became like a constant thing, and Pascal couldn't find any, momentum into the fight, right? So in boxing, you have this thing called pattern fighters, right? Guys who fight in a constant pattern. And when you keep disrupting them like that, like smack in the face and hold them, right? They find themselves restarting over and over again. Before they know it, the round's over, and it's just they can land anything. Right? But anyway, let me see if I could get in the chat really quick before I go. I am tired, man. I've been up all day. Well, duh. But I've been, it's been a busy day. Let's just say that. It's been a real busy day. All right. I should have already had the chat up, but what are you going to do? What are you going to do? All right. SHRHNS. Brother Peace, I want to give a shout out. I love your channel, man. The content is great. You'll be answering questions. Sure, you can shoot a question. Haplotype. Yo, D, what's up? Just got on. Holding, clinching, and hugging are all different to me. I agree. Haplo. Slipping punches, footwork, inside boxing, rolling, countering are all techniques that won't work in MMA. Therefore, they don't practice them. I agree. Fluke fights. MMA is true fighting. Boxing is one form of MMA, just using fists under loads of rules. Dragon Style, what's up, blood? Aztec says, Fluke tell that to Royce Gracie, who used jiu-jitsu to subdue, quote-unquote, real fighters. Right? Now, let me address this comment here. MMA is true fighting. Boxing is one form of MMA using fists under loads of rules. Now, first of all, this has never made sense to me. So, isn't kickboxing, like, doesn't that have boxing already? So, how can boxing be one thing of MMA, but kickboxing is another thing of MMA as well, right? MMA is hybrid fighting, okay, where you're allowed to do basically anything other than things that commissions don't allow, right? I already talked about those things. Like headbutting, which they actually did in the beginning, actually. Groin shots were allowed before, right? But they didn't allow that now. And one could say even for the better, okay, for the better, to be honest. They're implementing gloves and all that. But I wanna talk about this true fighting shit, okay? Now, everybody knows, right, this already. Like, everybody knows that the only way you can strike in boxing is with your fist. Everybody knows that. That's not a secret, okay? In fact, the rules are made like that on purpose, right? Boxing is limited by design. It was designed that way. So when people say, well, I mean, boxing, you can't kick in boxing. When they wrote the Marquess of Queensberry rules, if they wanted to allow kicking, they would have just said, okay, kicking's allowed. They actually banned kicking, right? If they wanted to allow wrestling, they would have just let it be. They banned wrestling, okay? A lot of things, elbows were banned. A lot of, types of strikes were banned on purpose, okay? It's not like, they were just like, oh, we don't know. This is the best we got. Like, we don't know anything. Like, we don't know what wrestling is, and we don't know what throwing elbows are, and we don't know what fighting the ground is. All we know is fist, and we just invented the sport. That's not the way it happened, okay? So this whole idea of, well, in boxing, you can't throw kicks and you can't throw knees. Well, duh. Well, no shit. They kind of, I don't know, banned that from the sport. It's like that on purpose. Okay, geniuses, right? So that's the first thing, okay? The second thing, I understand what mixed martial arts is. I understand that they practice different art forms, whether different forms of grappling and different forms of striking. That's what it is, okay? Let's not make it this whole because there is a misleading thing, okay? And it's always been like this marketing ploy thing, right? That I feel that here's the misleading part. You're making people believe that the MMA fighter has mastered all these things, like you're making it seem like, oh yeah, all these MMA fighters, they're unbelievable boxers, unbelievable kickboxers, unbelievable Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu artists, unbelievable wrestlers, unbelievable at Kung Fu, unbelievable at Taekwondo. They're unbelievable and great at everything. That's very misleading, okay? It is very misleading. MMA is where they allow basically different forms of grappling and different forms of striking in the sport. That's what it is, okay? It's not, they didn't call Vale Tudo MMA, okay? That's not what they called it. Vale Tudo's been around for a long time. They call it no holds barred fighting, okay, where all types of strikes, okay, and all types of grappling was allowed. That's basically what that is, right? Let's not overcomplicate it, okay? Let's not make it seem more than what it is. Also, here's the thing, okay? When people say one-dimensional, here's the thing, okay? I got news for you. The boxing that you see in MMA is very one-dimensional boxing, right? Because, the misleading part is, okay, is that a mixed martial artist can go to boxing. When I saw Mike Perry box, okay, he looked like a very basic one-dimensional boxer, right? Had no other dimensions to him. All he had was a jab, jab, cross, okay, a hook, and that's about it. That's all he had. And he could only fight at a certain distance. He couldn't fight at close quarters. He didn't know what to do on the inside whatsoever, right? When the guy got on the inside, he didn't know what to do, right? He didn't know what to do at mid-range. Okay, he was a very one-dimensional, if that. Okay, wasn't even good at that one-dimension boxer, right? So yes, I understand that boxing is quote unquote only one aspect of MMA, right? But that the all you take is a very small aspect of boxing. Okay, it's a very small percentage of what you're actually taking. You see? So this is why D-Style is D-Style, okay? And this is why I'm badass, right? You see how I just laid that shit down? There we go. What's up, Mr. Boxing Today? And yes, guys, I'm taking questions. I won't be on that much longer, but I'll take questions if anybody has any questions, right? At blood. Well, it's at blood. It's not at me, so, you know, I'll read it anyway. Briggs and Tony was pretty funny. Tony can still talk some shit. He needs to sit down somewhere, though. Mid-2000s, would have loved to see that fight. Wait a minute. Is James Tony trying to fight Briggs? I don't think James Tony should be. I don't think James Tony should be fighting, man. I just don't. All right. That's my opinion. If he wants to box some lower level guys, that's fine, but I don't think that they should be fighting anymore at all. Hydrotype brought up some good points, man, about like you don't see bobbing and weaving, and like you don't see that in MMA. Like, you know, when they say like, oh yeah, boxing is one aspect, like they don't even do like 99% of the shit that you see in boxing. They don't even do it in MMA, right? Like the bobbing, the weaving. Okay, I didn't even mention this, okay, but when I was talking about the stance, but the stance in boxing, you're just more bladed. Okay, it's just far less of a target. Like you're open for kicks and stuff like that. Obviously, you're definitely open for leg kicks and you're open for a takedown, but you can't do that in boxing, right? The stance is just you blade your body. It's a different stance, like all together, and it's very refined, and there you go. They were going back and forth today. Really? They want to show what show? I don't know what James Tony's doing. Still fighting, man. I don't know what the guy's doing. I remember when he beat up that bare knuckle champion or whatever. That's when he should have retired. To be honest with you, he should have called it a day then, right? He could have gone out as king of the streets or some shit, you know? Maybe like mid-2000s, I would have loved to see a fight with, I know James Toney wanted to box, he wanted to box Kimbo Slice. That would have been interesting. I think James Toney, in a boxing match, I think Tony would have beat his ass, but even that late, but what are you going to do? I honestly haven't even seen him, man. Mr. Boxing Today says I agree with all your points. Well, that's smart. You're a smart man, Mr. Boxing Today. Smart man. You know, one thing because look, here's the thing. Never forget this term, right? Anytime an MMA fan, okay, talks shit about boxing, and it's not all MMA fans, it's not, okay? And they try to bash boxing because you can't throw knees and like all this dumb shit, right? You just give them a look, like, you know, like a no shit look, you know, like no shit. Of course they don't do that. Because, and never forget the term limited by design, right? Limited by design. All right. So, guys, it looks like I don't know, the original guy said he wanted to ask a question. I guess he's gone or something because he hasn't asked anything. Okay. Aztec, since you're on, I don't know if you're still on or not, but hopefully either by this weekend or if not next weekend. Next weekend is probably better, to be honest, because I won't have shit to do next weekend. Hopefully by then we could, get that debate out of the way. I honestly don't know how you're going to argue that pound for pound has been bad for boxing, but that's, people are going to say, like, oh, well, you gave him the dumb side of the argument. And, well, that's what he wanted to argue. So what do you want me to do? Okay, I don't got any control over that. Little Water says, check out my man Yori on SoundCloud. Who the fuck is that? Who the hell is that guy? Right? Anyways, guys, this is DStyleBoxing. I'm out of here. Keep it boxing.